Well, young man, you first must be born again. God is a spirit.
No, I ain't born again. I ain't got to be born again. See, I was born in a new generation. Your mother could have brainwashed you, but can't nobody brainwash me. I'm ready.
So I had a really interesting conversation just now with some Jehovah's Witnesses, okay? A brother and a sister, black man and black woman. I saw them talking to somebody about God on the street, and, you know, I approached them. I wanted to hear what they had to say and talk to them about their faith. Because what I wanted to try to do was to understand, I'm really trying, guys, to understand the psychology behind religion and why it has such a hold on us as people of African descent. I mean, it is probably the number one thing that has kept us mentally enslaved, and enslaved in other ways, economically and otherwise as well. And so, you know, I approached them because I wanted to really kind of understand the why behind what they believe. Now, you know, my goal in this was not so much to change their mind or convince them that, hey, you know, this religion, this spirituality, you know, quote unquote, that you're following is not really a spiritual system. It's a religion. It's a doctrine. It's a dogma that's keeping your mind colonized, that's keeping you mentally enslaved, that's orienting you towards a Eurocentric worldview and abandoning your African roots, your African origin, you know, and that's also keeping you in bondage economically and in other ways as well, and not just in our community. So my goal was not to really unload all of that on them, but I did want to see where their mindset was. And so how I did this was really just by asking them a simple question. I asked them, why do you use the name Jehovah? Right? Because, I mean, they are Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay. Now, those of you guys are not familiar with the Bible or not familiar with Christianity, the word Jehovah does appear throughout many translations of the Bible. You know, that is the name that they have chosen to use for the name of God. Now, the origin of Jehovah, and you can just Google this, and that's what I did with them. I said, hey, this is what it says on Google. This is why you guys use the name, right? But if you Google it, right, we actually don't know the name of God. Okay. Now, you know, give you guys some historical context in the book of Exodus, when you guys are familiar with Moses, right? Hopefully you're familiar with Moses, big, you know, famous guy in the Bible. Okay. He's purportedly wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, but Moses was the one who led the Israelites, right, out of Egypt, what they called Egypt, you know, from bondage. And so, you know, during that time, God introduces himself to Moses, and God introduces himself with his actual name. Now, we don't know what that actual name was, but in the Bible, in the original text, the way God introduces himself, he introduces himself as YHWH. Okay. Now, originally that included the vowels. Okay. Those are consonants, right? The Y, the H, the W, the H. Those are the consonants, however. But the ancient Israelites eventually removed the vowels out of the original text of the Bible, right? It wasn't called the Bible back then, but they removed the vowels because of the commandment not to take the name of the Lord in vain, right? And so because they didn't want to accidentally or on purpose take the Lord's name in vain, they say, hey, we have an idea. We'll just, you know, take the name of the Lord out of the text altogether, so nobody will actually know God's name. That way we don't have to worry about taking it in vain. And so instead of God's name appearing in the Bible, you now have the characters YHWH, and from that you get Yahweh, right? You may have heard the term Yahweh. But the Latinized version is Jehovah. Now, it's important to understand, going back to the YHWH, that's all we know as far as the original characters are of God in the original Hebrew text, the Hebrew Bible. Now, where we get Yahweh from, because the vowels, right, you know, A, E, O, U, right, because the vowels were lost of God's name in the Hebrew Bible, the priests or the rulers, the governing religious leaders of the time decided to use the vowels from 2 words that were used to describe God, Adonai and Elohim. Now we know Elohim means gods plural. That's a plural form of gods, but that's oftentimes how God would call himself, you know, in the book of Genesis and in other, you know, texts in the Bible. So they took the A from Adonai and they took the E from Elohim, and boom, that's how you got Yahweh. Now, Jehovah, of course, is really just the Latinized version. Somebody in Rome, somebody in, Latin, right? They decided to, hey, we're going to make up our own vowels, and we're going to call them, we're going to put these vowels in here and call it Jehovah, right? But nobody actually knows what the name of God is. And so these are all guesses, right? They are just guesses. Okay, we're going to choose these vowels. We're going to choose these vowels over here. And so when I was speaking to the brother, obviously I referenced all of this and I pulled all the references and showed him, hey, this is what it says in Google. Of course, he can show me in the Bible where in the English version of the Bible, it uses the term Jehovah. And he's like, see, it's right here. It says, God's name is Jehovah right here in the Bible. But I said, brother, do you even know the origin of that name? And he didn't, right? He didn't know where it came from. And so I used the example of my own name. My own name's Robert, right? I used my own name and I said, hey, if I give you just my consonants, if I say, hey, if all you know about my name is that it's RBRT, right? Which are the consonants of Robert, okay? RBRT, just because you know that doesn't mean you know my name, right? Just because you know the consonants doesn't mean you know my name. And so I use that as an example. And so, but what was interesting was that he just wouldn't admit that he didn't know God's name. He just refused to admit that. And I told him hey, it's not a bad thing to say you don't know, right? It doesn't make you any less devoted. It doesn't make you any less committed to your faith. It doesn't make you any less Christian or Jehovah's Witness to say that you're really not sure if Jehovah's his actual name. But the thing is, and so his point was that just because we don't know, and he kept being careful with his words, he said, because we don't know the proper pronunciation of God's name. I said, no, brother, it's not a pronunciation. It is, you don't know his name at all. You know what I'm saying? Just because, if you know my consonants, RBRT, it doesn't mean, and you make up some vowels to put in there, you still don't know my name. It's not that you mispronounce it, you just don't know. Okay, and so that's the point I was emphasizing to him. But his point was that just because we don't know God's name, he didn't say that. He said we may not know the pronunciation of it. He said just because we don't know the pronunciation doesn't mean we shouldn't use the pronunciation that we have. And I said, well, he says, what will it hurt? And I said, well, it actually is hurting you, right? Because they're using a Eurocentric Latin, Rome, right? This is where it comes from. I said, hey, when Christianity was developed, where did it go? Did it go down into Africa? Yeah, to some degree, it went down to Ethiopia. We know that. But by and large, the Christianity we have today went up through Europe, went up through Rome, Italy. And so that is evident. And then it came back down to Africa through the Ma'afa, okay, through the enslavement of our ancestors. And that's what I told them. I'm like, these guys are the ones that enslaved you, brother. You know what I mean? And so that's why I told them you don't want to use a Latinized term for your head, your God, your source, your creator, because that is the language of those that enslaved you and enslaved your ancestors. And so why not use, if you want to be true to your faith, your spiritual system, why not use the actual term that is the source? Why not just use YHWH? Why not just say, I don't know God's name? Why not be authentic to the truth of what it is? And so I couldn't convince him. And what was interesting was that at the end of that conversation, he asked me, hey, what's your name again, brother? Right? And if you guys were paying attention, right, I just told him that if I gave you the consonants of my name, Robert, doesn't mean you would know my name. And it's just evident that even at the end of that conversation, he wasn't listening. He wasn't listening even to what I was saying, even though I gave him my name multiple times and I gave him the consonants of my name multiple times. At the end of it, he still didn't know my name. And to me, that was prophetic. That was prophetic in many ways because, he doesn't know the name of God. And then at the end of the conversation, he asked what my name was. So here's my point, guys, is that it's this brainwashing, and I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm doing research now. I'm in research mode, and I really want to have more conversations like this with individuals because I want to try to understand it. So in the course of the conversation, the other sister who was with him brought up Jesus, and I said, "Oh, I'm glad you brought up Jesus because that's actually a name that we do know. We don't just have consonants now." Right? Where we did for Yahweh, we just had the consonants, YHWH. For Jesus, we actually know what Jesus' real name was. And it was Yeshua or Yehoshua. We know that for a fact. And so my question to them was then, well, now you actually know how to pronounce the correct name for the Son of God, why don't you do it? Right? If you know that his name is Yeshua, why are you using the term Jesus? But again, this goes back to that indoctrination. This goes back to to them, it does not matter what name we use. But I'm like, if it doesn't matter, why does the Bible say that there's no other name under heaven by which men may be saved except the name of, again, the Bible says Jesus, but we know his name was Yeshua. So it may seem trivial, but when you are, if you're a Christian or if you speak to Christians, right, and you're trying to come back to an African-centered perspective, you have to realize the damage that a spiritual system, a religious system that is centered in European thinking, European thought, and has been influenced greatly by Europe, the impact that has on you mentally and spiritually. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's having a major impact on you because you see it in your community. The fact that you have churches on every corner in the black community, the fact that, people of African descent are the most religious people in the world by far, but yet we're at the bottom in every, stat, every economic stat, health, right? I think about, criminal justice, education. I think about all these different statistical factors, and there's a reason for that. And so, but that's the starting point. So I encourage you, whether you're a Christian or whether you talk to Christians, I encourage you just to start with that. Because I'm not even asking him to disavow his faith. I'm not asking him to stop believing what he believes. I'm not asking him to, do any of those kind of things. I'm asking him really just to be even more true to his faith. I'm asking him to be even more committed to his faith, to take away the stuff that is not true about what he's believing, that he knows is not true, that we have evidence that is not true, that he doesn't know. He doesn't know God's name for sure. And he's not using the correct name for the Son of God. These simple things. But if our people are not willing to even do that, then there's no way you're going to convince them that, that this Eurocentric Christianity has been the biggest factor to our detriment. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. To our detriment, right? So that's where we have to go, guys. And it's really my goal to focus on bringing us back to an African-centered orientation, African-centered spirituality. It doesn't matter how you do it. You don't have to adapt African religions. Keep your faith, whatever your faith is, that's fine. Keep it. I'm just saying, don't orient it towards Europe. Orient it back towards your ancestry, back towards the continent. Ancestry was so important to the ancient Israelites, to the Hebrews, that they wrote about it throughout many of their texts. You read about it in the book of Numbers, the book of Leviticus, and throughout the Torah and other parts of the Bible into the Gospels. You read about lineage and genealogy. But for us, that's not important. But it is important. It has to be important that we orient ourselves back towards our culture, because if we don't, these are the things that are hindering us. Well, that's great if you're going to go to heaven and your soul's going to be saved, right? But is that all you care about, is saving yourself? What about your community that's dying physically, and each generation is dying? When we think about eternity from an African-centered standpoint, we're not thinking about the individual eternity of ourselves. We're thinking about the eternity that we leave behind here on earth, because the earth continues to go. The earth continues to go, and there's going to be generation after generation that continues to be here as it is now. And that's the eternity that I'm thinking about, is not just like some spiritual plane, which is great. Definitely want to go there. It's going to be awesome. Looking forward to it. Okay. Not looking that much forward to it. Don't want to go there anytime soon. But I want to make sure that whatever eternity is left behind here on earth for the generations that come behind, that's the eternity that I'm also thinking about. So it's both. You can't just focus on your own personal salvation. Okay, that, good thing I believe that I can escape and I'm safe, even if I'm living in squalor, even if my community's dying and people are getting shot in the street, and even though all these horrible things are happening in my community, as long as my soul is saved, I'm happy. Right? That's not it. That's not African-centered spirituality. Okay? So I encourage you guys to kind of work towards that, but I wanted to educate you and share the conversation I had with our dear brother and sister about, their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses. Please subscribe to our channel, guys. Share this video. Hopefully it'll reach out. Hopefully it helps somebody. If you have any Christian friends or folks who are very devout, please share this video with them. And I hope this educates you and inform you as well. So that way, when you do have these conversations with your Christian family friends, you're able to, stand your ground, so to speak, and hopefully enlighten your community.
The purpose of our organization is to start right here in Harlem, which has the largest concentration of people of African descent that exists anywhere on this earth. There are more Africans here in Harlem than exist in any city on the African continent, because that's what you and I are, Africans.